By Christmas morning in 1937, somewhere on a headland north of Bath, Maine, the lighthouse keepers found the Mastiff's chain coiled in a perfect circle on the gallery floor. The clasp was fastened. The links beaded seawater that steamed in the cold salt air. Lord was gone. The dog who had walked the catwalks like a second watch for 3 winters straight, steady as iron, heavy as a man's trust. Gone. The light sat high on a granite spur where the Atlantic chewed the rocks twice a day, and fog came in so thick you could taste the weight of it. The nearest town was 6 miles down a washboard road that turned to mud when it rained and ice when it didn't. 2 keepers lived up there in rotating shifts, Walter Gaines and his younger cousin, Owen. Both men from families that had worked coastal lights since before the Civil War. Both men who knew weather, knew tide, knew the way a dog moved when something was wrong. Lord was a Mastiff, brindle coat, barrel chest, jowls that dripped when he drank from the tin bowl they kept outside the watchroom. He'd been brought up as a pup by Walter's wife before she passed, and the dog had stayed. Quiet animal, not given to barking or running off. He walked the iron steps between the keeper's house and the lantern room like he had a job to do, and maybe he did. On fog nights when the beam swung its cold ring over empty water, and the bell told its rhythm against the dark, Lord would sit on the gallery and watch the sea as if he were keeping something at bay. Walter's wife had named him Lord because she said a dog that size deserved a title. She'd died the winter before, pneumonia that came on fast and took her in 4 days. Walter didn't talk about it. But after she was gone, the dog stayed closer, slept outside the keeper's quarters, followed Walter up the tower every night without fail. People said the dog grieved. Walter said the dog worked. Christmas Eve had been clear at first. Cold, but clear. The kind of night where the stars sat so low you felt you could reach up and scrape your knuckles on them. Owen had the evening watch. He'd climbed the tower just past dusk to check the lens and trim the wicks. Lord followed him up, the way he always did. Owen said later that the dog had been calm. No whining, no pawing at the door. Just sitting by the catwalk railing, breath steaming in the lantern glow, eyes fixed out toward the black. Then the wind changed. Owen said it came from the north, sudden and cold, carrying a smell he couldn't name. Not fish, not salt. Something else. Something that made the hairs on his arms stand even through his wool coat. Lord stood, ears forward. Then the dog turned and padded down the iron spiral without a sound, fast but controlled like he'd been called. Owen called after him once, "Lord, stay." The dog kept going. Owen heard the iron steps ring under those heavy paws, descending fast, then nothing. By the time Owen got down to the base of the tower, Lord was already gone. The keeper's house door stood half open, swinging slow on its hinge. Owen grabbed the hand lamp from the peg and stepped out into the yard. The wind had died. Fog rolled in from the water in a single solid bank, thick as fleece, the kind that muffled sound and turned distance into nothing. He called the dog's name. Once. Twice. The fog swallowed it. Then the bell tolled. One long, deep note that shook the air and died slow. Owen turned and looked up at the tower. The bell rope hung still inside the housing. He could see it through the open hatch lit by the lamp glow from above. It hadn't moved. The clapper sat motionless against the iron bell. He went back inside and woke Walter. The 2 men pulled on their coats and grabbed the hand lamps and searched the rocks, calling Lord's name into the fog. The lamps hummed. Not loud, but steady, a low vibration in the metal casing that shouldn't have been there. Owen held his lamp close to his ear. The hum didn't stop. It felt alive, like something inside the brass was moving. Both men felt it in their palms. Neither said a word about it. They walked the perimeter twice, checked the boathouse, checked the oil shed, checked the cistern and the low trail that led down to the supply dock. No dog. No tracks in the frozen mud. No sound but the slow break of surf below and the hum of their lamps, steady and wrong. At midnight, Owen climbed back up to check the lens. The light had to be tended no matter what. That's when he found the chain. It lay on the iron grating of the gallery floor in a perfect circle, links pressed flat, clasp closed and locked. The leather collar was gone. The metal was wet, not damp, but wet. Seawater pooling in the low spots between the links. And it was warm. Owen touched it barehanded and pulled back fast. The metal was warm as blood. He called Walter up. Both men stood there in the lantern room, the beam sweeping cold over their shoulders every 12 seconds, and stared at that chain. Walter crouched and held his hand over it without touching. Heat rose off the links in a shimmer they could see in the lamplight. The seawater didn't just sit. It moved, slow beads rolling along the curves of the metal, steaming faint in the freezing air. The night was below zero on the rocks. Nothing should have been warm up there. "He didn't slip this," Walter said. His voice was low, careful. "That clasp doesn't open on its own. You have to press the spring." Owen didn't answer. He was looking at the glass of the lantern housing. On the inside curve, just above the iron catwalk railing, there was a print, a paw print, wet, clear, pressed into the glass as if something had walked across it from the inside. The print sat chest-high to a grown man, near the top of the lens casing where no dog could reach even if it tried. Walter saw it too. He stepped closer, slow, like approaching something that might bolt or burn. The glass was sealed. Had been sealed since they'd cleaned it 2 days prior, polished it with vinegar and linen until it shone. There was no way in except through the hatch at the base, and that hatch had been closed and latched all night until Owen came up for his 6 o'clock watch. "Check the wick trimmer," Owen said. Walter crossed to the small tool shelf bolted to the tower wall. The wick trimmer lay there on the sill, brass handle, iron blade, exactly where he'd left it after the evening trim. He touched it. Warm. No flame had been touched in over an hour. The wicks were clean, cold, untrimmed since dusk. The lamp oil sat cold in its reservoir. The whole system ran on clockwork and vapor. Nothing that would heat a tool left on stone. But the trimmer sat there on the sill, warm as if it had just come out of a fire. Walter pulled his hand back and wiped it on his coat, slow, like brushing off something he didn't want to name. "We're not saying this," he said. Owen nodded. "No, we're not." They stood in silence for a long time, the lens turning its steady arc, the beam cutting through fog that pressed against the glass like something trying to get in. Neither man touched the chain again that night. Just before dawn, a boy named Thomas Coombs, 10 years old, son of the supply road foreman, was walking the keeper's road on an errand for his father. He swore later, and swore on his mother's Bible, that he saw a dog round the bend near the old picket gate where the road dropped toward the shore. Big dog, dark brindle coat. He said the dog's front half was there, clear as anything, shoulders and head visible in the early light. And then it just wasn't. Like it had walked around a corner that didn't exist, or through a door that wasn't there. The back half of the dog vanished first, then the rest, smooth and quick, like something had pulled it sideways into nothing. The boy ran home. Didn't speak of it for 2 days, not until his mother found him sitting in the woodshed, shaking, refusing to go back up that road. When she finally got it out of him, she told him not to say it again, not to anyone, especially not to the keepers. By morning, the fog cleared. The sun came up pale and cold over the Atlantic, and the lighthouse sat quiet on its granite perch, the beam still turning, faithful and merciless. The keepers walked the rocks again in full daylight with the dog's name on their lips and dread in their chests. No dog, no body, no blood, no tracks in the mud or the frost, but the light smelled wrong. Walter said it first, standing in the lantern room with the morning watch, the lens still faintly warm from the night's burn. The air inside the glass housing tasted sharp, chemical, out of place. "Smells like soap," he said. "And something else." Owen sniffed the air. Soap, yes, clean and sharp, like lye or camphor. And under it, faint but unmistakable, singed hair, like something had been held too close to flame. They opened the housing and checked every surface. No burn marks, no ash, no sign of scorching. But the smell stayed for 3 days. From that night on, the keepers dimmed the beacon at dusk, not all the way. Just a quarter turn on the oil valve, enough to soften the beam. They told the harbor office it was a maintenance concern, told the district inspector the lens had developed a hairline crack and they were waiting on a replacement pane. None of it was true. The light worked fine, but neither man would let it burn full strength after dark. Not anymore. And they did not speak the Mastiff's name near the lens. Not Walter. Not Owen. Not the relief keeper who came up 2 weeks later and asked once where the dog had gone. He left, Walter said. And that was all. People in Maine still talk about that Christmas, the one when Lord vanished from the light. They talk about it quiet, the way you talk about something that shouldn't be named outright but can't quite be forgotten. Men who work the coastal lights now, young men with diesel engines and electric panels, still won't work alone after dark if they can help it. The old hands around Bath, Maine tell the younger ones, you don't turn your back on a light that hums and you don't follow a dog that walks like it's been called by something you can't see. And if you find a chain coiled perfect on cold iron, still warm, still wet, you leave it there. You don't ask how. You don't pick it up. You just leave it. And you walk away. They tried to rebuild the timeline. Walter sat at the kitchen table in the keeper's house the morning after, a pencil stub in his hand and a sheet of paper torn from the logbook, and he wrote down every hour he could account for. Christmas Eve, 4 in the afternoon. Lord had been with him in the oil shed. Walter remembered because the dog had stepped on his boot while he was checking the drum seals, and Walter had pushed him off, gentle. The dog had sat in the doorway after that, watching the light fail over the water. 5:30. Owen had come on duty. Walter had gone down to the keeper's house to make coffee and heat the stew his neighbor had brought 2 days prior. Lord had stayed outside near the base of the tower. That was normal. The dog liked to be near the light. 6:15. Owen had climbed the tower for his evening check. Lord had followed. Owen swore to it. He'd heard the dog's claws on the iron steps behind him, steady and sure. When Owen reached the lantern room and lit the wicks, Lord had been sitting on the gallery, calm, looking out toward the black water. Owen had spoken to him. Good boy. Keep watch. The dog's tail had thumped once against the iron. 6:40. Owen had descended to grab a rag he'd forgotten in the storeroom. When he came back up, Lord was still there, still sitting, still watching. 7:10. The wind changed. Owen wrote that down specifically. Wind came from north, hard and cold, smelled wrong. 7:12. Lord stood, turned, and went down the stairs without a sound. Fast but controlled. Owen called after him. The dog didn't stop. 7:15. Owen found the keeper's house door open. Lord was gone. Fog had rolled in, thick and complete, in under 3 minutes. 7:16. The bell tolled once. Walter looked at the timeline and frowned. You're sure about the bell? I'm sure, Owen said. He was standing by the stove, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold. I looked up. The rope wasn't moving, but I heard it clear. Walter tapped the pencil against the paper. The wind can make it ring sometimes, if it catches the housing the right way. There was no wind, Owen said. The wind had stopped. Walter didn't argue. He knew what he would have said a week ago. He knew what he would have believed. But he'd touched that chain. He'd felt the heat coming off it in a room where the temperature sat below freezing. By mid-morning, the harbor master from Bath had come up the road with 3 men from the fishing docks. Word had spread fast. A dog didn't just vanish from a lighthouse. Dogs didn't undo their own collars. The harbor master, a man named Horace Bellamy, stood in the keeper's house and listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Walter finished, Horace took off his cap and scratched his head. You checked the rocks? Twice, Walter said. Once in the dark, once at first light. Could he have fallen? There'd be a body, Owen said. The tide was low. We'd have seen him. Horace nodded slowly. And the chain was locked? Locked, Walter said. Clasp fastened, collar gone. Horace put his cap back on. We'll search again. Bring dogs. They brought 2 dogs from a farm inland, hounds used for tracking deer. The men spread out across the rocks in a loose line, shoulder to shoulder, moving slow. The hounds pulled hard at first, noses down, tails high. They followed a scent from the base of the tower toward the cliff edge, then stopped. Both dogs sat down at the same time, 10 feet from the drop. They whined, low, anxious sounds that didn't match the confidence they'd shown a minute before. One of the handlers, a man named Petite, tugged the lead. "Come on, girl. Work." The dog didn't move. She lay down flat, ears back, and refused to go forward. The other hound did the same. Pettit looked at the other handler, a younger man named Russ, and Russ shrugged. "Never seen her do that." "Try the other direction," Horace said. They turned the dogs around and walked them toward the keeper's road. The hounds moved fine, noses working, until they reached the old picket gate where the boy had seen Lord's back half vanish. Then they stopped again. This time they didn't just sit, they backed up, pulling against their leads, whining high and sharp. "They smell something," Russ said. "Or they don't," Pettit said quietly. The men searched the road anyway, walking it in both directions, checking the brush on either side. One of the fishermen, a man named Coombs, the boy's father, found a scrap of leather wedged between 2 stones near the gate. He held it up. "This part of the collar?" Walter took it and turned it over in his hands. The leather was old, cracked, the same color as Lord's collar. But it was dry. Bone dry. No seawater, no mud. Just a clean strip of leather that looked like it had been cut, not torn. "Could be," Walter said. But his voice carried doubt. They kept searching. By afternoon, they'd covered every accessible stretch of rock and road within a half-mile of the light. No body. No blood. No tracks that made sense. But twice, men reported hearing something they couldn't place. The first time, it was Horace. He'd been walking the low trail that led to the supply dock when he heard a 2-note whistle, sharp and clear, coming from up near the tower. He looked up. No one was there. He climbed back up and asked the others. No one had whistled. The second time, it was one of the fishermen standing near the boathouse. He said he'd heard a single bark. Low, deep, unmistakably a large dog, coming from the water. He'd looked out over the rocks. The tide was rising, waves breaking white against the granite. No dog, no boat. No sign of anything alive out there. "Could have been a seal," Russ said. The fisherman shook his head. "I know what a seal sounds like." They marked the spots with strips of cloth tied to fence posts and rocks, the way search parties did when they wanted to track coverage. By dusk, the strips formed a rough grid across the headland. The men gathered near the keeper's house, cold and tired and uneasy. Horace looked at Walter. "We'll come back tomorrow, bring more men." Walter nodded. Appreciated. But that night, after the searchers had gone, Owen went out to check the cloth markers. 3 of them were missing. He remembered exactly where they'd been tied. He'd tied 2 of them himself. Now the post stood bare, the knots gone, no sign of tearing or wind damage. And in one spot, where a strip had definitely been tied to an iron rail near the tower base, a new strip had appeared, clean white cloth knotted tight in a place no one had marked. Owen didn't touch it. He went back inside and told Walter. Walter pulled on his coat and went out with a lamp. He stood in front of the new strip of cloth and stared at it for a long time. The knot was neat. Tight. The kind of knot a man ties when he knows what he's doing. He reached out and touched the fabric. It was damp. Not wet, but damp, like it had been dipped in water and wrung out. "We didn't tie this," Walter said. "I know," Owen said. They stood there in the cold, the lamp between them, and neither man said what they were both thinking. The older men from Bath, the ones who had worked the coast for decades, started talking that week. Not loud, not in front of the younger crew, but in low voices over coffee at the dockhouse in the back of the supply shop, on the road when no one else was near. "Don't go up there alone," one of them said, a man named Thaddeus Goss, 72 years old, who'd worked 3 lights in his life and retired inland. "Not after dark. Not until this settles." "Settles how?" someone asked. Thaddeus didn't answer. He just shook his head. The men in Maine who worked the lights heard it too. Word moved fast along the coast, carried by supply boats and rail post. A dog had vanished from the North Bath light on Christmas Eve, and the keepers had found things they couldn't explain. By New Year, the Lightkeepers Union had quietly updated the duty roster. No man was to work the North Bath light alone until further notice. 2 keepers, minimum, at all times. No one wrote it down as policy, but everyone followed it. On the 5th night after Lord disappeared, Owen woke to the sound of footsteps on the tower stairs. Heavy, steady, ascending. He lay in his bunk and listened. The rhythm was wrong. Not the light, clipped step of a man in a hurry, not the slow, careful climb of someone checking the light in rough weather. This was something else. Heavier, deliberate. He got up and pulled his boots on without lacing them, grabbed the lamp from the hook, opened the door to the keeper's house and stepped into the cold. The tower door stood open. The iron stairs spiraled up into darkness, lit faintly by the glow of the lantern room at the top. Owen held the lamp high and called up. "Walter?" No answer. He climbed. The steps rang under his boots, the sound echoing in the stone shaft. When he reached the lantern room, Walter was standing by the lens, staring out at the water. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. "You hear it?" Owen asked. Walter nodded. "I thought it was you," Owen said. "I thought it was you." They stood there together, the lens turning its cold arc behind them, and listened. The footsteps had stopped. The tower was silent except for the clockwork hum of the lens mechanism and the distant break of surf below. Then from somewhere beneath them, down in the stairwell, or below it, in the rock itself, they heard it. A single, low bark. Deep. Unmistakable. The bark of a dog as big as a man's chest. The bark of a mastiff. It didn't echo. It just sat in the air for 2 seconds and then stopped. Clean, like a door had closed on it. Walter looked at Owen. Owen looked back. Neither man moved, neither man spoke, and neither man went down those stairs to check. They stayed in the lantern room until dawn side by side, and they did not let the light go out. By the 2nd week, the search had turned into something else. Not hope anymore. Not rescue. It was ritual. Men from Bath and the surrounding townships came up the Keeper's Road in shifts, walking the same ground they'd already walked, marking the same rocks, checking the same tide pools. They dragged grappling hooks through the shallow water near the dock. They pried loose boards from the boathouse floor in case something had fallen through. They climbed down the cliff face on ropes and checked the ledges where seabirds nested, places no dog could reach but that had to be checked anyway because there was nowhere else left to look. The women came too, brought thermoses of coffee and pots of fish stew and cornbread wrapped in cloth. They stood on the porch of the keeper's house with their shawls pulled tight and watched the men work. Some of them had known Walter's wife. Some of them remembered Lord as a pup, clumsy and sweet, before he grew into the steady animal who'd walked the light. They didn't say much, but they stayed. On the 10th day, a minister from Bath came up to hold a brief service. He stood in the keeper's house with his hat in his hands and spoke a prayer for the lost and the missing. He didn't say dog, he said creature. Walter appreciated that. When the minister finished, he asked if there was anything else the keepers needed. "No, sir," Walter said. "Thank you for coming." The minister nodded, but before he left, he stopped at the door and looked back. "There are places on this coast," he said quietly, "where the sea takes what it wants and doesn't explain. It's been that way since before we built the lights, maybe longer." Walter didn't answer. The minister left. That night, Owen found the first note. He'd gone up to the lantern room for the evening check, the same routine he'd done 1,000 times. Trim the wicks, check the oil reservoir, polish the glass if it needed it, wind the clockwork mechanism that turned the lens. But when he reached the top of the stairs and stepped onto the gallery, he saw something that hadn't been there an hour before, a scrap of paper, folded once, tucked into the iron railing near the place where the chain had been found. The paper was clean, no water damage, no dirt. Just a small square of white, crisp as if it had come fresh from a notebook. Owen picked it up and unfolded it. Inside, in pencil, rough but legible, were 3 words: "Still on watch." The handwriting was Walter's. Owen stood there with the paper in his hand and felt the cold crawl up his spine. He turned and went down the stairs fast, not running but close, and found Walter in the keeper's house, sitting at the table with a mug of tea. "Did you go up to the light today?" Owen asked. Walter looked up. "This morning. Why? Did you leave a note?" "A note?" Walter frowned. "What are you talking about?" Owen held out the paper. Walter took it and read it. His face went still. "That's my hand," he said slowly. "But I didn't write this." "When's the last time you wrote anything?" Owen asked. Walter stood and crossed to the logbook on the shelf. He opened it to the last entry, dated 2 days prior. The handwriting was the same. Neat, cramped, the way Walter had written since he was a boy learning his letters in a one-room schoolhouse. "I didn't write that note," Walter said again. His voice was flat. "Certain." Owen took the note back and held it up to the lamp. The pencil marks were fresh. No smudging. No fading. The paper was clean. No creases except the single fold. He turned it over. Nothing on the back. "Where was it?" Walter asked. "In the railing, near where we found the chain." Walter set the logbook down carefully. "Show me." They went up together. The lantern room was bright with lamp glow, the lens turning its steady rhythm, the beam cutting out over the black water. Owen pointed to the spot on the railing. Walter crouched and ran his hand along the iron. Cold. Dry. No sign that anything had been placed there recently. No moisture. No disturbance in the frost that had begun to gather on the metal. "You're sure this is where it was?" Walter asked. "I'm sure." Walter stood and looked at the note again, then folded it and put it in his coat pocket. "We don't tell anyone about this." "Why not?" "Because they'll think we're cracked," Walter said. "Or they'll think one of us is playing a game. Either way, it doesn't help." Owen wanted to argue, but he couldn't find the logic to fight it, so he nodded. But 3 days later, it happened again. This time, it was Walter who found it. He'd gone out to check the fog bell housing after a brief squall had blown through, making sure the mechanism hadn't jammed. When he opened the small access panel to inspect the rope, he saw it. Another note, folded the same way, tucked into the bell housing where the rope fed through. Walter pulled it out, unfolded it, read it, watching still. Same handwriting, same pencil, same clean, crisp paper. He looked around. The rocks were empty. The road was empty. Owen was inside the keeper's house. Walter could see him through the window, pouring water from the kettle. No one else had been up to the light in 2 days. Walter walked back inside and set the note on the table in front of Owen without saying a word. Owen read it. His hands tightened on the paper. "Where?" "Bell housing." "We need to tell someone." "Tell them what?" Walter said. "That someone's breaking into a locked lighthouse and leaving notes in my handwriting? That we're hearing footsteps and dog barks from nowhere? They'll pull us off duty and send us inland for evaluation." Owen set the note down. "Then what do we do?" "We keep watch," Walter said. "Same as always." But the notes changed things. The men who came up to help search started noticing the keepers differently. The way Walter would stop mid-sentence and stare at the tower. The way Owen wouldn't turn his back on the stairs. One of the younger fishermen asked outright, "You two all right up here?" "Fine," Owen said. But the fisherman didn't look convinced. The theories started circulating. Quiet at first, then louder. Some said Walter had enemies. A man he'd turned away from the light years ago, maybe. Someone with a grudge who'd come back to settle it and taken the dog as a warning. Others said the dog had gotten sick, disoriented, wandered off the cliff in the fog, and the rest was just coincidence and grief, making the keepers see things that weren't there. A few, the older ones, the ones who'd worked the coast long enough to know its moods, said something else. They said the rocks past the thorn fence, the stretch of coastline north of the light where the water ran deep and cold even in summer, had always been strange. That fisherman didn't anchor there. that nets pulled up from those waters came back torn, or empty, or tangled in ways that didn't make sense. That the land out there, past where men walked regularly, didn't follow the rules the rest of the world followed. One man, a dock worker named Carver who'd lived in Bath his whole 70 years, said it plain over coffee at the supply house. That headland takes what it wants. Always has. My father told me, and his father told him, you don't work that light alone, you don't go past the fence at night, and if something calls you, you don't follow. The younger men laughed, but not loud, and not long. By the third week, the search had stopped. Officially, the harbor master declared Lord missing, presumed lost to the sea. The fishermen went back to their boats. The farmers went back to their fields. The women stopped bringing food, but the rules stayed. Parents in Bath started telling their children not to walk the Keeper's Road after dusk. The supply drivers who brought oil and coal up to the light started scheduling their runs for morning only, refusing to make the trip in low light. And the men who worked the other lighthouses along the main coast, men who didn't know Walter or Owen personally, men who'd only heard the story secondhand, started talking among themselves about the North Bath light and the way it felt different now, the way the beam looked colder than it used to, the way the bell sometimes rang when there was no storm. Walter and Owen didn't talk about it, but they felt it, the weight of what had happened pressing down on the place, changing it, making it something other than what it had been. On the 21st night, Owen went up to the lantern room for the midnight check and found the chain again. Not in the same spot. This time it lay coiled on the tool shelf next to the wick trimmer and the oil can. Clean. Dry. The clasp open. He called Walter up. They stood together and stared at it. The chain hadn't been there an hour before. Owen had checked the shelf himself when he'd come up at 11 to wind the mechanism. The shelf had been empty except for the tools. Walter reached out slowly and touched the chain. It was warm. Not hot. Not burning. But warm. Like it had been sitting in the sun, even though the lantern room was cold enough to frost the iron and the sun had set 6 hours ago. Owen picked up the wick trimmer. Also warm. They checked the oil can. Warm. They checked the lens housing, the gallery railing, the floor grating. Everything metal in the lantern room was warm. Not just faintly. Noticeably. Impossibly. The air around them was below freezing. Their breath steamed. The glass of the lens casing had frost forming at the edges. But the iron was warm, and the warmth spread, slow and deliberate, like something had walked through the room and touched everything in it. Walter picked up the chain and held it in both hands. He looked at Owen. "We're not alone up here," he said quietly. "Haven't been since Christmas." Owen nodded. He didn't have the words to argue. They took the chain down to the keeper's house and locked it in a wooden box under Walter's bunk. Neither of them wanted to touch it again. Neither of them wanted it near the light. But that night, lying in their bunks in the dark, they both heard it. Footsteps. On the stairs. Ascending. Heavy. Steady. Deliberate. The steps reached the top, paused, then descended. Slowly, all the way down. Then up again. The sound continued until dawn. By spring, Walter and Owen were gone from the North Bath light. Not dismissed. Not transferred. They left. Walter took a job with the Harbor Authority in Portland, working the docks, nowhere near a tower. Owen went inland, found work on a dairy farm outside Augusta, as far from the coast as he could manage while staying in Maine. Neither man spoke publicly about why they left, but the men who replaced them lasted 3 weeks before requesting reassignment. The next crew lasted 5 days. By summer, the Lighthouse service had quietly redesignated the North Bath Light as a 2-man minimum station with mandatory rotation every 14 days. No keeper was to work more than 2 weeks at a stretch. No keeper was to be alone in the tower after dark. The new rules weren't written into the manual, but they were followed. Strictly, the chain stayed in the wooden box under the bunk in the keeper's house for 2 months. Then one morning, a relief keeper named Amos Pratt opened the box to store some personal effects and found it empty. He asked the other keeper, A man named Howell, if he'd moved it. Didn't touch it, Howell said. They searched the keeper's house, the oil shed, the boathouse, the tool room. No chain. That afternoon, Howell went up to check the lens and found the chain coiled neatly on the gallery floor. Exactly where it had been found Christmas morning. Warm. Damp with seawater. Clasp fastened. They left it there. Neither man touched it. When their rotation ended, they reported it to the district supervisor. He came up personally, looked at the chain, and ordered it removed and destroyed. 2 men took it down to Bath in a canvas sack and had it melted at the foundry. 3 days later it was back. Same spot, same warmth, same seawater beating on the links. After that, they stopped trying to move it. The chain became part of the light. Keepers learned to step over it, to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't there. Some rotations, it would be gone for days. Other times it would appear every morning, coiled perfect, waiting. The notes stopped, but other things didn't. Keepers reported hearing footsteps on the iron stairs when no one else was in the tower. Heavy, ascending, always ascending. The sound would reach the lantern room, pause, then descend, slowly, methodically. Some keepers said they heard breathing near the lens housing on still nights, low and steady, the kind of breathing a large animal makes when it's resting but alert. One keeper, a man named Lyle Hodges, swore he saw a shadow on the gallery one November evening, broad-shouldered, low to the ground, moving with the gait of something on 4 legs. He'd called out, the shadow had stopped, turned toward him as if listening, then walked through the iron railing and disappeared over the side. Lyle went down the next morning with a hand lamp and checked the rocks below. No marks, no tracks, nothing. He didn't request reassignment, but he never worked the night shift again. By 1940, the North Bath Light had a reputation. Young keepers were warned about it in their first week of training. Older keepers used it as a test. If you can work North Bath for a full rotation without asking questions, you can work anywhere on the coast. Most didn't make it. Those who did came back different, quieter, less likely to laugh off the stories other men told about lights and fog and things that moved at the edges of vision. The townspeople in Bath adjusted too. Parents told their children not to walk the keeper's road after dark, not alone, not even in groups. The supply drivers scheduled their runs for daylight only and refused to stay past 4 in the afternoon, even in summer when the light didn't come on until 9. Fishermen who worked the waters near the headland avoided the rocks north of the light, the stretch where the water ran deep and cold. Nets set there came back empty or torn, and twice boats anchored in that area reported hearing a single, deep bark echoing off the cliffs at dawn. Unmistakable, impossible, and gone before anyone could pinpoint the source. In 1947, a young teacher from Portland brought her class on a field trip to see the lighthouse. She stood with the children on the keeper's road and pointed up at the tower, explaining how the lens worked, how the beam carried for miles, how the keepers lived. One of the children, a girl of 8, asked if they could go inside. "No," the teacher said quickly. "We stay on the road." "Why?" the girl asked. The teacher hesitated. Then she said, "Because that's the rule." The girl accepted it. So did the other children. They didn't ask again. Rules like that in places like Maine weren't questioned. They were learned young and followed. By the 1950s, the story of Lord's disappearance had become local lore. The details shifted depending on who told it. Some said the dog had been stolen by a rival keeper with a grudge. Others said he'd fallen from the cliffs and his body had washed out to sea, and everything else was grief and imagination. A few said the dog had gone mad, broken his own chain somehow, and run into the rocks to die alone the way old animals sometimes did. But the version people in Bath, Maine didn't say out loud, the one they passed in whispers in the backs of boats and the corners of pubs, the one they told their children late at night when the fog came in thick, was different. That version said the dog hadn't left at all, that he was still there, still on watch, that whatever had taken him Christmas Eve in 1937 hadn't killed him, but changed him, pulled him into something else, something that walked the tower and the rocks and the iron stairs, and couldn't be seen but could be heard, could be felt, could leave chains warm and damp on cold metal and paw prints on glass no hand could reach. That version said the light had wanted something, needed something, and the dog had answered. That lord had walked into the fog not because he was called away, but because he'd chosen to go. That he was still keeping watch, the way he always had, from a place no one living could follow. That version said if you worked the North Bath light long enough, if you stayed quiet and didn't ask too many questions, you'd hear him. Heavy steps on iron, a low bark from the rocks, the rattle of a chain that shouldn't be there but always was. And if you were smart, you'd leave it alone. You'd step over the chain, you'd nod to the shadows. You'd let the light do what it needed to do and not look too close at what walked beside you in the dark. The North Bath Lighthouse was decommissioned in 1961. The lens was removed and placed in a maritime museum in Portland. The tower was sealed. The keeper's house was sold to a private buyer who used it as a summer home for 3 years before abandoning it. Vandals broke in. Weather stripped the paint. The iron stairs rusted. The gallery railing sagged. But people in Bath, Maine still don't go up there after dark. The road is public. The land is accessible. But locals know better. On still nights, when the fog rolls in from the Atlantic and sits heavy on the rocks, some say you can still hear it. Footsteps on iron stairs that no longer turn. A single deep bark echoing from a tower that no longer burns. The rattle of a chain coiling on itself in the dark. In 2003, a restoration group tried to reopen the tower as a historical site. They cleaned the keeper's house, repaired the stairs, replaced the broken glass. On the second night of work, the foreman found a chain coiled on the gallery floor. Old, rusted, but warm. He picked it up barehanded and dropped it immediately. The metal had burned him. He took a photo, sent it to the Historical Society. They identified it as a dog chain, circa 1930s, standard issue for large working animals. The foreman asked if he should remove it. The Historical Society never replied. The restoration project was quietly abandoned 2 weeks later. The chain is still there. Rangers who patrol the area report seeing it from time to time. Always in the same spot, always coiled neat. Some say if you go up on Christmas Eve and stand on the gallery where the keepers stood that night in 1937, you'll feel it. A presence, not hostile, not cold, just there, watching, waiting, keeping the light the way it was always meant to be kept. 3 versions of the story remain. The human version says someone killed the dog and staged the scene to scare the keepers, though no one ever came forward and no motive was ever found. The natural version says the dog broke free somehow, fell from the rocks and was taken by the tide, and everything else is coincidence, imagination, and the weight of isolation, making men see things that weren't there. And then there's the third version, the one that doesn't get written down, the one people in Bath, Maine still don't say out loud near the coast when the fog rolls in and the air smells like salt and something else, something cold and clean and wrong. That version says Lord is still there, that he never left, that whatever called him into the fog that Christmas Eve didn't take him away. It took him deeper, that he's still on watch the way he always was, walking stairs that no longer creak, guarding a light that no longer burns, keeping something at bay that no one living has the words to name. Which version makes sense here? The human one, the natural one, or the impossible one nobody in Bath, Maine dares to say out loud near the old North Bath light? Subscribe so you don't miss the next story.